Yes, that's right. Giving the government total control over society would be the most freeing thing that we could possibly do. What exactly would you be more free to do under total tyranny of the state? How about walk the streets safely? How about earn a wage without having to compete with cheap foreign labor? How about eating with less fear of harmful chemicals in your food? How about the ability to enjoy clean public spaces and parks? How about going about your life without feeling the need to be a political expert and destroying your family with political arguments and divisions? This is what I'm offering you if you just make me dictator. So, yes, if we can get this video up to 1,000 likes by next week, I will take that as my call to be dictator, and we'll do a face reveal and we'll get this thing going. But I am going to have to warn you, I'm not totally versed in governing philosophy, governing it all. I do not have an MBA, a Master's of Business Administration, so it's going to look a little hectic. My general approach is going to be see a problem and send men with guns to fix it. Homeless people, we're going to send men with guns. We're going to take them and basically force them to do labor to earn their shelter and earn their food, because guess what? You can't be sleeping on the streets. We're not going to allow that. Fat kids, we're going to send men with guns and make them run on a track for 2 hours a day until they're not fat anymore. People wearing Crocs, we're going to send men with guns and make them act like civil adults. So that's going to be my approach. But no, in all honesty, I'm not totally sure about what I truly believe the best governing philosophy is. I have certain goals that I want to see accomplished, and I think I lean more towards an authoritarian style of government to accomplish those goals, and I will get into that. I have several reasons for that. But as far as whether that's a monarchy or an aristocracy or whatever you want to call it, I don't know. I'm going to give my general take on these things, but I wanted to start with addressing an important concept that I think is missing from these conversations sometimes, and that is I feel like people get caught up in ideal versus what's possible. People come up with these ideas of what they believe the best form of government would be without really addressing whether or not it's realistic. I think libertarians are a good case study of this. They have a lot of ideas, and I just don't think that they really put forward viable solutions to the problems we're faced. It seems like a lot of it's theory, and a lot of it depends on the population sort of being a certain way. But more particularly, some of the problems I have with them is like they're and this seems to be the focus for a lot of them, is they're very pro-drug. They think that drugs shouldn't be illegal, and they have all sorts of arguments that say, drug wars and whatnot. But I do think that at the end of the day, laws against certain drugs have really cut back on the prevalence of them in society. And we look at cities where that stuff is becoming more lax, and it's obviously having a very real effect. So it seems to work in theory, but maybe it is ideal that, okay, listen, really it is ideal if there is no government, right? In a perfect world, we wouldn't need some central administration to tell us what to do and handle things in the way that we have governments handling things now. But we don't live in a perfect world, and a lot of things cannot be solved by the free market, and there's actually a lot of opportunity in free markets for a lot of foul play to take place, and I do not believe in the natural corrective nature of the free markets as libertarians seem to believe in them sometimes. But that's just kind of an example. I think libertarians are kind of like that perfect case study of what's ideal versus what's realistic. I think with the problems that we're faced with now, libertarianism is definitely not the answer. And I want to get into why maybe a representative republic or any form of democratic government may not be our best option either. And I think a lot of what I'm going to be pointing out, I'm not just theorizing from, well, if there's a democracy, then these things happen. But basically, I'm going to go over what we are seeing. And I think one of the first things that came to mind when I was sort of moving away from a democratic style of government or a representative republic, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to keep calling it a democracy from here on out because representative republic is a mouthful. Basically, a democracy, and when you have a government, they are in charge of enforcing morality. So if the morality of the people has turned sour and is no longer moral, and the people or the general populace are leaning in the direction of evil, then what they're voting on is not in sound morality. And I think that's pretty obvious with what we see in today's world, where apparently because people are voting for it, we're supposed to be allowing children to be put under these gender-affirming care drugs. They're being taken from their parents, as is the case with that Jeff Younger, I think is the dad's name. I forget what the kid's name is, but yeah, obviously that's not okay. I'm not okay with that. So I don't believe that immoral things should be allowed to propagate through society just because they're voted on. And what I'm getting at the core is essentially that we are not a people that is deserving to be self-governing. John Adams, I believe, is the one that said that the Constitution was made for a moral and religious people and wholly inadequate for any other. And we are becoming less religious and less moral. And I believe we're losing that right to self-govern. But that's just generally, that's kind of like the situation that we're in. I think more generally, and this also boils down to people, but I think generally a democracy thrives on a people that is intelligent and educated. And there are several reasons we've seen a decline in education that I'm not going to get into now. But I think this is a fundamental flaw in democracy in general, or representative republics. People like to say that, well, it's a representative republic, and so the issues I'm about to bring up may not have such an impact or aren't so important because the representatives are supposed to be the smart ones with all the solutions, and they're just supposed to appeal to us in some way. But generally, people are not all that intelligent, to put it kindly or succinctly. The amount of knowledge that a person would have to make an educated decision on foreign policy is way beyond the scope of the average person. I think even if they were intelligent enough to put together the pieces, a lot of people just don't have time, and the vast majority of people are relatively uninterested in things like that. So there's a lot of problems that go into maintaining a properly functioning democracy. If people are not intelligent enough to be able to make informed decisions, or if they're not interested, or if they're being given wrong information, because that's another thing too. People can only come to conclusions based on the facts that they're given. So let's say you have one group of people or a couple groups of people that have control or dominance, basically a monopoly over the information that they're receiving, then their opinions can be very easily swayed, especially since, like I said, I think a lot of people are uninterested in doing the deep dives. Even if we have freedom of information, a lot of people are not seeking that information out. I think what tends to happen for a lot of people on, election season is they will go to myballot.com, or they'll get on their state website and pull up a copy of their ballot. And this is the best of them, right? This is the best of the average person. A lot of people don't even do that. They just kind of maybe listen to a debate once. They listen to the presidential debate, and then they decide whether or not they're going to vote Republican or Democrat, or some of them are just listening to the debates for fun. But I think the best of the voting people, on average, obviously there's people who are really interested, but the best of the average person will download a ballot, and then they go to the campaign websites of each of these people and see who they like the best, who's saying the things they like the most. And that is just a terrible way to do politics. It's a incredible lack of responsibility, or abdication of responsibility. And we live in a culture right now where voting is like a a sacred duty. Like if you're not, everyone is like expected to vote, or at least that's the line from some people. You're expected to vote, and if you don't vote, then you can't, complain. And so there's this stigma around voting that everyone should be doing it. No, not everyone should be voting. Only people who are truly educated and interested in the topic should be voting. And I guess that's, for me, assuming that people should be voting anyways, which that's an argument we can get into. If we're going to do voting, I definitely think that there should be a lot of restrictions on it. You have to be married with kids, own property. Maybe we could do a weighted voting system. If you're married, that's, married and with property, owning property is a baseline for voting. And then maybe you get more weight on your vote with each kid that you have. I don't know. That's just something I'm throwing out right now. But yeah, I think we've seen that democracies are easily corrupted. I think as we see in America right now, I think even leftists would say politics are corrupted by big business. They might say that big oil and gas are lobbying the elections, and that's hurting their environmental positions. And obviously, those of us on the informed right, yes, the informed right, we'll call them, not anything else. Us on the informed right, we understand that there's a lot of foreign influence, and they don't even have to really directly foreign influence like some people think of it as. They've basically tricked some people into worshiping them on a religious level. If you know what I'm talking about, I think it should be pretty obvious. But I think the answer to that, the answer to the problems that we find in democracy, essentially, is authoritarianism. A group of people that have essentially dedicated themselves to the service of the people. And I know there's a lot of dangers and whatnot. Trust me. Don't act like I haven't heard all of these arguments before. It was sort of drilled into us by every single person ever growing up. So the fact that I come to these conclusions is kind of a miracle in its own, with the level of propaganda we were faced with, that democracy is the only answer, freedom, liberty, that was hounded constantly. But, I don't believe in giving voting power to foreigners who have been here for all of 5 minutes and saying that their say is equal to mine. I just totally disagree with that. So, I think right now, with the situation that we find ourselves in, I'm very pessimistic about voting our way out of it. I think that much should be obvious now that I've moved on to talking about authoritarianism. We are fighting a system that is hostile to us. This is not and by us, I mean American people, blood Americans. The system is hostile to us. They would, more than anything, like to replace us with cheap labor. And essentially, I mean, there's a lot of motives that go into it, and it's not just business economy reasons. There are deep historical, maybe esoteric for some people. A lot of people know what I'm talking about, but some of you don't, and that's for a totally different episode. But our system has been hijacked by a hostile foreign people that is seeking to eradicate our way of life. They are seeking to end America as we know it. And I'm not talking about globalists. I'm not talking about leftist or anything. It goes much deeper than that. But we have no way of fighting against it if we're relying totally on the system that we've been given, on voting, on, winning hearts and minds. I don't think that they're so concerned if we start winning hearts and minds. Because I think part of the reason I say that is, if any of you have been paying attention to the news in Germany, I believe 7 of their candidates of the AfD have died. And I'm not going to say that they're assassinations, but it seems like it very well could be. And I posted this on X recently too. We can have no political solution if they assassinate our leaders. So instead of voting for it, my thoughts are that the only solution would to have a strong, united movement led by one or a few extremely intelligent and charismatic people that can figure out a way to assert our will on the country. And I'll be quite honest, I don't know what that looks like. I'm hoping that people far more intelligent and charismatic, obviously, like I said, more intelligent than myself, will be able to figure those things out for us and be the leaders that we look to. We need people to look to and say, this is our guys. The things that he's saying, I believe, and we can start organizing in a meaningful way against these things, because the current context that we find ourselves in is not one of mere public disagreement and discourse, and we're arguing about things. What we find ourselves in is a war, and I truly believe this. We are in an existential struggle, and that's really the back and forth. That's the conflict we find ourselves in. It's not a difference of opinion. We are at war for our survival, essentially. So, but meanwhile, a lot of us have been tricked, and by us I just mean Americans, true Americans, have been tricked into believing we're in a debate, a discourse that is, they disagree, we disagree. They want socialism and we want capitalism. Like, I think a lot of people are ignorant because of who controls the information. A lot of them are ignorant of the fact that this is for the existence of your country. This is for the future of America. And by America, I mean the American people, and not the overwhelming amount of foreigners that have come here and say that they're American because they have a piece of paper. They're here for economic reasons. They're not here because they're patriots or anything like that. Make no mistake, our country is being stolen from us. And if those in power are able to assist this invasion by giving them citizenship, giving them voting rights, and this comes down to an overwhelming majority of people that are here are just trying to take our country from us, and they're going to vote to do that, I'm not okay with that. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, because they did it constitutionally, legally they said all these immigrants could come here and get equal voting rights and whatnot, that they can, they just deserve to have the country because democracy. Totally against that. So I'm interested in organizing in whatever way is necessary, in whatever way is realistic, to essentially propagate true America, to keep true America alive. And that's why I would ultimately land on calling myself a fascist. There's many governing philosophies, and maybe I'll touch on those here in a little bit. But generally, I would just call myself a fascist. And as I've told other people in the past, I think it's important to define terms, especially when you self-identify them or self-identify by them. So I would generally define fascism as an authoritarian government with nationalist, traditionalist sentiment, willing to use force to reinforce the position of the nation that they represent. And personally, when I think of nation, I think ethnicity plays a lot into that. When you're talking about nation, I think the etymological root word is natal, birth. You are part of a people, you are part of a nation by birth, and not by citizenship or a state that says so, but by who your people are. And I think, personally, I would say that's defined largely by ethnicity. And I kind of wanted to make a little side comment here. A lot of people will say, well, then aren't you a National Socialist? It's like, okay, yeah. I mean, if that's the definition that you would give, my definition of that, if I were to call myself that, would be that National Socialism is just fascism with an explicitly racial take on who the nation is that the government represents. So under that definition, yeah, I would consider myself a National Socialist. But what I wouldn't do is say that all of the economic policies that the National Socialists adopted I also agree with. It's the specific doctrine I wouldn't necessarily align myself with. But if I'm allowed to define my terms, then yeah, I'm essentially in favor of an authoritarian government that uses the force of the government, the sword of the government, to reinforce the identity the interests and specific morality of the nation that they represent or the people that they represent. And for me, I define American as essentially a European Christian. I believe Christianity would be the moral framework if I'm, referring to the morality that would be enforced. It'd be Christian morality, and the nation would, be essentially European. I believe in a generally broad take on the ethnicity of American, but I do think it has to be European. And I addressed some of that in my race episode as to why I believe that nations should be essentially made up of single ethnicities. I think there's a lot of potential for conflict. And I was reading a book recently, and essentially on this topic, and I think they put it very well when they said that races sharing a nation act like centrifugal forces. So essentially, there's a lot of movement going on in the state. There's a lot of things happening and developing, and the ethnicities, the various ethnicities and identifying groups within the nation act as sort of a pulling apart. If the forces aren't counteracted and being brought to the center towards a unified direction or trajectory as to what is a citizen of the nation, then things tend to fall apart very quickly as these groups develop their own interest, and the nation no longer becomes, a unified country or state. They become sort of a battleground for these various groups to assert their own interests. And I think that's what we're seeing now. America is being used essentially as a tool for whoever can hold on to it. I think, to put it very plainly, Israel has control of the tool to a large extent right now, and they're using us as a bludgeon against other countries in the Middle East to assert their dominance in the region. And that's inevitable. And they're a super minority. Imagine what happens when there's other ethnicities that are very large majorities in the country. If this is going to sound bad to say, but if black people could really organize, don't you think that they would be using the state to accomplish their own goals for themselves? I mean, they already largely are, and I don't think it's totally on their own. I think they are getting a lot of help from leftist liberals and certain types of people. But and if they had some sort of identity, do you not think that they would be using a lot of their power to help Africa? If Indians had a huge majority and a lot of control over our government, do you not think that they would use the United States as a tool to help India? What about the Chinese? Like, this goes for any people. If you have a big tool, which is America, and a bunch of groups competing over it, then you don't have a country anymore. You have a tool that other people are using. And as an American and as Americans, that tool belongs to us. We built that tool. We're the only reason the tool exists. And I don't really have to have good reasons as to why I think we should keep it. I mean, really, it doesn't really come down to a moral question even. At the end of the day, like, if I'm not saying might makes right necessarily, but morality is sort of irrelevant if somebody has the power to do something right. You can sit there and say it's wrong, but if they do it, then they're going to do it. So I think that white people need to fight for America, fight to regain a majority in a way that honors human dignity and whatnot, and is in a way, and it's going to take a long time. If we're going to do this right and have our hands clean, it's going to take a long time to correct the wrongs that have been happening, but we do need to, as Americans, recognize that struggle that we're in and be working towards that goal as a people, or else we're going to lose the country. I mean, those are the options, is we either band together as an American identity and reclaim our country from the clutches of these other groups that are using us and abusing us, or we cease to exist. And I think that's really what I think it comes down to. But I've sort of rambled now a little bit on my take for nationhood and essentially what the fascist regime, I can't speak. Fascist regime would be protecting and acting in the interest of, and that's essentially how we would identify our leaders. There's a lot of rhetoric and whatnot that we can listen to and be like, okay, yeah, that guy wants exactly what I want, and so we're going to put our effort behind him, supporting him, whatever that support looks like. We're gonna be there. We're gonna go to the rallies. We're gonna do the things, whatever the plan is. I think we'll have a pretty good idea of who is at the forefront of that movement by what they're saying and where they come from, who their connections are, who's supporting them. So if somebody's being propped up by Tucker Carlson, obviously a no-go. And I do have some pretty good faith that when that person or that group of people start to rise up, I think it's going to be pretty identifiable, and hopefully it'll happen quickly, and we can get some things back on track. But back onto the original purpose of the episode, which was to address governing types. Basically, how I would accomplish the goals that I mentioned in the intro. So safer streets, I think, by having no more foreigners, essentially, in the country, or at least really cutting them back a number a little bit through remigration and whatnot. Listen, we need to glorify nationalism. We need to glorify ethno-nationalism, and by that I mean just put it as a high place in people's minds so that people want to return home. They want to make their own homes great. Listen, Indians, don't you want to make India great? How can you do that in America? You know, you're here in America. And that's kind of a betrayal, don't you think? But that's kind of the mindset I think we should be having is, Africans, what glory, what greatness is there to be had as a minority in another country, groveling for handouts from their government? Is there much pride to be had in that? I don't think so. So wouldn't you love to be part of a story in Africa where you go to that country and there's a bunch of American or ex-American black people there that make a country great? Wouldn't you like to be part of that story? Like, I'm sorry, if I was black, I'd be like, heck yeah, let's go and make Liberia, I think was the original project there. Let's go make Liberia great and be part of that. Build it up, give something great for your progeny to take part in. But yeah, I think the safer streets would come about as, less foreigners, because we know who commits the crime. We know who is causing a lot of the problems. And I think there is something to be said for homogenous communities being high trust. I think it's just a natural reaction for people that if you're in a diverse neighborhood, you have a bunch of people who you don't know their customs, you don't know their ways of life, they don't look like you. And I think just naturally you tend to be more cautious and reserved with them. So that high trust community goes away where... And, in contrast to that, if you're in a community where you go to church with half the people that are there and they look like you and there's basically no differences, substantially that you have with them, you have that higher trust community. And I think, having a homogenous community would be the only way you get back to that America where people weren't locking their doors, because we know who kidnaps children for trafficking. You can look up statistics on that. It's not us. It's not us for the most part. I mean, we might have greater magnitude numbers. I guess I haven't looked too deep into the numbers, but we are pretty familiar at this point with per capita. Some of us, we know who's doing it, and we know how much improvement, or I guess we have a good idea of how much improvement there would be if we were to fix our societies in this way. I also think that an authoritarian government is much more likely to use very harsh punishments for things. I see things in the news all the time where something happens and the person is getting 1 to 2 years in prison. I'm like, are you serious? Are you kidding me right now? Like, it just seems so obvious to me that person should immediately face capital punishment, no questions asked. And I think I'm there on a lot of things. These people need to be, and that's part of the goal too, is these people need to be extremely afraid of doing things wrong, like killing somebody, other things, molesting people, producing illicit films. People need to be trembling in fear at the thought that they would be caught doing those things. And so I would even, personally, this is a personal opinion, I would go further than the death penalty. Or maybe not farther than the death penalty, but I would go further than long-term imprisonment. That's what I meant to say. Death penalty is really like that maximum. But I do think that we should be inflicting corporal punishment, physical punishment on people for certain wrongs, that it shouldn't just be put in a cage. I think that's an easy sentence for some of them. And, as far as particular punishments, I'm not going to get into that right now, but I do think whatever it looks like, the government needs to make people very, very afraid of committing certain crimes, because we need to get the morality of people back on track. Like, we cannot have, and listen, this is, the contrast is you have guilty people doing things that are extremely wrong to innocent people. And so it feels a little controversial to say, but I don't think it should be that controversial that those people doing those things should be terrified, absolutely terrified of doing those things. So, moving on to a little bit lighthearted of a topic. I think an authoritarian government that cares about its people, really truly cares about its people, is going to be more likely to enforce regulations that tell companies that you can't put certain things in food. We like to talk about the food in Europe and whatnot, and listen, I'm on board for regulation like that. If banning certain chemicals in the food is going to make us healthier, I'm all for that. I don't care about some company's profits, and clearly the free market of, we're going to just out this company, I'm not saying they're doing this, but Kellogg's, let's say Kellogg's is putting this chemical in the food, and so everyone just boycotts Kellogg's. Like, I don't think that the government really, or not the government, the economy really works that way. Bud Light's still around. That was probably like the most successful boycott, like in my lifetime, but they're still there. They're probably going to do just fine. I don't see Anheuser-Busch discontinuing that line anytime soon. But, wouldn't you think, whose pocketbook did we really hurt? Did we really say anything? Or would it make more sense, for the government to step in and say, yeah, whoever made that marketing decision, we're going to put you in prison. We're going to make you do manual labor for trying to enforce this mental illness on the rest of the people. That's just kind of an idea. And then also, I think it's kind of funny. This is sort of a unique thing in our circles. If you look up neo-fascism, there's like eco-neo-fascism. There's a lot of pro-environmental guys on our side, which is something that we share in common with liberals a little bit, but I think it's totally acceptable. We cannot have companies destroying the environment. I think that much should be obvious. And you say stuff like that, and all the boomer cons go, "It's a tree hugger." They have their little insults and things they throw their way at anybody who starts to care about the environment. But listen, my ideology and the ideology of a lot of people that agree with me comes from a place of caring. We care about the world. We care about our people. We care about our nation and, keeping it the way it is. And that means keeping the people healthy. It means keeping the environment clean. It means keeping people safe. So, a lot of what I've said sounds controversial to people, but listen to the end goal of what I'm after. What I'm after is safety for people. It's, being able to, all the things I said at the beginning, these are the things that I want to see. And as I see it, voting is not going to get us there. It is going to take an authoritarian government, a bunch of highly competent, very educated people to essentially take responsibility onto themselves, saying, we're not asking you about your opinion. This is what we're doing, and it's in your interest. Because apparently people don't know what's in their best interest. But that's sort of where I'm at generally with government philosophy. Another point here to add in real quick is that if we were to have some more authoritarian government like that, people can essentially live their lives disinterested in politics. We don't have to be arguing and bickering over Democrats and Republicans anymore. somebody, excuse me, somebody who's actually interested in politics and making a difference in the world can prove their worthiness for their opinion to be heard by becoming an expert in a field. So let's say you're passionate economically about, solar fields. You go to school to be an electrical engineer or an environmentalist or whatever your concern is, and you learn, economics, and you make the case for the thing you're interested in, and that's how you can be involved in politics, as opposed to all of this bickering and going back and forth of liberal and conservative, Democrat, Republican. Like, no one, you'd stop caring what people identify as, because it's like, okay, you identify as a classical liberal, good for you. Whose opinion are you going to change? If the government's doing what they're doing, so instead of wasting your life, or wasting a large chunk of your life endlessly researching all of these things and trying to come up with all the gotcha points and whatnot, how about develop a real hobby? How about develop a skill that you can make money from? Expand your life, live your life without, let the state people that are interested in the state handle those things. And, when things start to go wrong, we know who to blame. And when there's discontent, I think even authoritarian governments are interested in solving it. Sometimes not in the best way, but listen, I think that the form of government and all the things that come with it are far better than the alternative that we are being given right now. What we're being given right now is I essentially can't go out in public in my area with any sort of safety. I have to be on high alert the entire time. I have to have my gun on me. And, an argument can be said, well, yeah, that should be how it always is, but I don't like feeling uncomfortable everywhere I go in the town that I was born in. That's ridiculous. And for some of you that have listened to other episodes that I've done and interviews, I live in a relatively rural area in Indiana. Dox time. I just doxed myself. I live in Indiana, and I live in a rural area of it, but yet still, it's everywhere. I want to tell a quick story here real quick of a time I was in Indianapolis. I went into Indianapolis for a bachelor party for one of my friends, and I believe we were there on like a Tuesday night. I might just be thinking Tuesday because, that's like a trope, like on a random Tuesday, but no, really, I don't think it was the weekend. I do believe it was during the week, and I want to say right after 9 o'clock, the whole town shifted. Like there was not on a dime or anything. It was pretty rapid progression as it got dark out. I was incredibly shocked at what I saw. There was people smoking weed everywhere. Weed is not legal here. There was people doing far more than that. I had several people essentially accost us with their presence, coming up to us, basically slumped over, could barely stand up. I think that would be probably attributed to fentanyl. I had people trying to rap in my face. Like they had their phone out and their music, and they were trying to freestyle rap to it, and they wanted money for the performance. It was ridiculous. And man, we stayed in an Airbnb or something that had a window outlooking the main road that has all the bars. This would be, I think, just south of the giant roundabout with the statue, the large statue in it. About 2 a.m., we heard a bunch of commotion, and we go over to the window, me and a buddy, because everyone else was asleep. We go over to the window, and this flash mob had formed, essentially, where this guy, I think he had like a turntable, a disc, like in the middle of the street, and there was a flash mob. Yeah, this guy was rapping, and there was all these people gathered around him, dancing and stuff. I was like, what is going on? That's in the middle of a street, in the middle of a large city. Okay, large to me. Listen, I'm a rural boy, but so we decided to go down there, and we talked to a police officer that was down there because they were trying to get a handle on the chaos, and we were like, is it like this every night? He said it pretty often. I mean, to be honest, I don't remember exactly what he said. I was in such a state of shock from what I was seeing. And he said that one of their biggest problems is street racers. They have a lot of street racing going on every night, and I'm just like, this is Indiana. Where are the representatives at? That was something that really, really upset me when that thought crossed my mind, is like, where are our elected representatives at? This is our capital city. On the main strip, people are laying passed out from these drugs, and they're street racing, and I'm being accosted on the street. Where the F are these people? Like, I was so infuriated that our government, our Indiana state government, would allow that to happen. But I do know that's the case everywhere in almost every major city. Honestly, shame on them. I believe, as a Christian, they will be held accountable for allowing some of this stuff to go on. And a fascist government just wouldn't tolerate it, you know. Fascist governments are sort of characterized by their extreme intolerance of degeneracy and crime, and that is the draw for me. I don't want some person hopped up on drugs to approach me at 9 o'clock, not even that late, in the middle of a large city while I'm trying to have a good time with my friends and demand money rapping in my face. The level of anger that I feel about that stuff, I'm ready to do whatever it takes within Christian morality to solve these problems. These people need to be locked up. They need to be punished. Something needs done. And I do not think, obviously, that democracy can fix it, or any form of non-authoritarian government. Libertarians, I'm genuinely interested. Libertarians, what is your solution? Are you going to have private companies that are somehow making profit off of dealing with these people? How are you going to do it? I'm genuinely interested to know, but the way I see it, it would make a heck of a lot more sense for a bunch of people, let's say like a small group of people, to say, this is what we're doing, let's do it. And so we all organize around that and essentially militantly fix things with force. I don't understand how else these things get fixed. So I am going to wrap it up here a little bit. I did say I was going to talk about governing philosophies overall, so I'll do a quick little bit of that. First of all, I wanted to talk about, I'm advocating for fascism now, but what is fascism? What is a fasces? If you haven't done this before, look up fasces, Fasces. It is actually a tool. It's a tool. So it's an axe, essentially, or an axe head at least, that is bound by a bunch of sticks. That is the symbol of fascism. I love the symbol, actually. I think it's really cool. You can find the symbol, kind of rambling a little bit, you can find the symbol all over government buildings. I didn't realize this. I was in Detroit not that long ago, and I found one of their courthouses, and it had fasces on it. And the government building, other government buildings that I've been in have the fasces on it. So I think it's cool. I think there's a heritage there that we can call back to. But yeah, it's a tool, right? We're going to use the axe, and we're going to chop down the evil thorns and thistles and weeds that are corrupting our society with the axe portion, and the sticks, the wrapped together sticks, will signify our unity as a people as we do it. But so I'm interested in fascism as a tool, and what comes after that, I'm not sure. There's an interesting concept that I want to introduce you guys to called Anacyclosis. If you check my Twitter bio, or my X bio, I should say, I call myself an anacyclotic fascist. And I say that partially because it sounds cool, and partially because what I mean is I'm interested in using fascism as a tool to progress to the next stage. Anacyclosis is essentially a philosophy, not totally developed, not empirical by any means, but essentially it says that with every governing type or governing philosophy, there are inherent problems in it, and the inherent problems in that governing philosophy lead essentially to the next form. It's pretty interesting. If you look up Anacyclosis, it's Anacyclosis. If you do that, I think there's just a website. It's it's not totally in depth, but they have some resources in there that basically talk about the idea, and I think it's interesting. So what comes after fascism? I don't know. Personally, I am in favor of an aristocracy. I think a small group of people that essentially are raised or know it's their duty to run society, highly intelligent, extremely high IQ people, would basically be the ones who make the decisions. Whether or not you need a dictator for that, I do know. Excuse me, I do know that some people think that you can't really run a government like that without a clear leader, and I think there's probably something to that, which would be maybe more fascism. I don't know. I don't really care what you call it, but authoritarian would probably be just the best general characteristic. Some people have floated the idea of a monarchy. I do like the idea of a monarchy. I think historically it has been the most stable form of government over a long period of time, although I think that can be partially attributed to the people. In that same book that I was reading about centrifugal forces, it was talking about how when you have a homogenous group of people, the momentum or the inertia of the people as they exist can keep the nation or the country going even in times of extremely poor administration. And there's another word that they use, but essentially that even in the essential lack of a government, the people can stay together, and some form of administration or state will eventually rise again without much problem. However, when you're in a disunified, multi-ethnic country, if the central state shows any sign of wavering, it basically just falls apart. So I don't know if the stability of monarchies can totally be attributed to the monarchies, or just the fact that the people have a common history and heritage and story and religion and all these things that they share in common. But I think the main problem I would have with a monarchy is I don't know, especially in the modern age, how is that brought about? How do we decide whose family is royalty? Is it just whoever the guy that rises up and gives our people voice, like, him and his family, his progeny, are royalty? Because I don't know. I think there has to be some sort of history with the family before a monarchy. I just don't know how that works. So maybe monarchy is the best. How we get to it, again, this comes back down to ideal versus practical. I think what we can practically do is organize as a group. I don't know totally on the logistics of how that's done. Organize as a group, take our countries back, take Europe back, give Europe back to the Europeans and not all of the foreigners that are currently trying to occupy it. And then we'll figure it out from there, essentially. But practically, I don't know how we install a monarchy. I think that, I'm just ignorant, possibly, but I don't see how that's done. So, finally, to wrap up the episode, I kind of wanted to address a common trope from people that all authoritarianism is insert communism or fascism. And so here I wanted to make an important distinction. First of all, anyone who thinks that, or essentially lumps together all forms of authoritarianism, communism, fascism, whatever you want to call it, and says it's all the same thing, and any form of authoritarianism is communist, I just laugh. I think it's funny. It's totally misinformed. But I wanted to end on this sort of, let's clarify the trope here. First of all, fascism is European/Christianity or Christian because it is straightforward. They don't lie about what they want to do. They have a vision, they tell you the vision, and then they execute it. There is no deception. There is no getting around, deceiving people. It cuts through the nonsense, and it asserts itself in a forceful way, and is not willing to entertain tolerance of evil. For those reasons, it is Christian European. That is the ethos of the European person, is to be straightforward, honest. We do not have backhanded business dealings. Stereotypically, of course, there are people, but stereotypically, this is the stereotypical European, I believe, is very high in moral character. Probably, I would agree with people when they say that is a result of centuries of Christianity and Christian teaching that brought about that mindset. But So that's what makes fascism fascism. It's honest. It does not tolerate evil. Communism, on the other hand, is more reminiscent of I don't know if I can say this without YouTube censorship, but they've been pretty friendly so far from what I've seen. They're allowing much more discussion, so maybe this will get removed in the future. But for now, I can say communism is Jewish. It's Jewish because it relies on deception and lies, and the father of the Jews, like the New Testament says, the father of the Jews is the father of lies. So very characteristic of communism, they rely heavily on wordplay, craftiness, kind of twisting things around. And, did God really say for morality, did he really say this? And sort of twisting words around like the Jews have done with their interpretations that they've recorded in the Talmud. They reinterpret and try and twist things in such a way to where the Old Testament and the things that they are commanded to do and believe are essentially irrelevant. The Old Testament, that's too high and lofty for us to interpret, so we have to rely on the Talmud, which is essentially a bunch of debates between rabbis. And so we can say, well, Rabbi this and that said that this commandment actually means, and so therefore that means we can turn on the lamp on Friday and just turn this little dial thing here so that light's hidden, and we just turn it back when we need light, and it's not technically doing work. We can be within our home by putting up this fishing line around New York, and that means we're in our homes, so we can leave our house on Shabbat and carry things in our pockets when we go. Okay, now I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here, but yeah, so that's the difference between communism and fascism. Communism is lies, and it reinforces lies that we're all equal and we all deserve equal. Newsflash, we're not equal, and we don't all deserve equal. Higher achievers deserve more than not higher achievers, and we should give opportunity where we can, because allowing people to contribute to society is good for society, right? But let's not pretend that doctors should be getting the same pay as a McDonald's cashier or anything like that. And maybe that's not the argument, but anyways, kind of going around in circles again. This concludes our second episode. Wow, I'm only on the second one and already losing count. So this concludes our second episode. Yes, fascism is complete and total freedom. If you didn't put that together, we're going to be free from the criminals, free from obligation to argue with our families on Thanksgiving about this and that candidate. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I'm going to do the usual shout out. I need to start doing this towards the beginning, so hopefully you made it this far. Please like, subscribe, share the videos. Share the videos with people who don't agree with you, and maybe you don't agree with me, but it can be a good conversation starter. Maybe I went over the edge and said some things that you can't talk to your family about, but let me do that, okay? Let me do that. I will talk to them. Send me their number. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. I don't think you can post numbers on YouTube anyways, but okay. We're closing the episode. I hope you guys have a great week, and hopefully I will see you next week with my Reformed episode. That is the plan, as always, aiming for Wednesday, so make sure to tune in. Bye.